Hi, it's Ashley from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and welcome back to my channel where I make a lot of cake and cookie decorating tutorials as well as give a lot of baking business tips. And at the end of this video, I will be sharing with you my pricing for this cake, so be sure to stick around till the very end. So for today's video, I have made a chocolate cake, and this is going to be a 3-tiered cake as you all saw in the thumbnail, and it is made up of an 8-inch, a 6-inch, and a 4-inch cake. Now I crumb coated these prior to filming, so you can go ahead and check out this video in the right hand corner if you want to know how to crumb coat your cakes. For those of you that are new to my channel, I have been on a buttercream journey. So I've been trying out a bunch of different buttercreams to see if my tried and trues really are the best way to go or if there's other options. Ordinarily, I use Italian meringue buttercream or sometimes American buttercream, but today I'm using faux Swiss meringue buttercream. I fell in love with this when I tried it out a month or two ago. So if you want to see that video, you can go ahead and check it out in the right hand corner. That will explain why I'm really liking it and why I think it's best to be used for a cake like this. So I made this cake for a 3-year-old and she really loves Encanto. Now she didn't want this to be fondant covered, but fondant details were okay. So that's exactly why I decided to go with a 3-tiered cake rather than a carved cake, because if I can't cover it with fondant or modeling chocolate, I find I just can't get that carved look that I'm looking for. So look at how dreamy this faux Swiss meringue buttercream is. Now this is a very pale purple. It's actually a little bit warmer in person, but the camera's just making it look really cool right now. If you ever find that your purple looks very cool, just add a few drops of pink food coloring. And for this, by the way, I always use gel food coloring. Now to get this fairly smooth, what I do is I take a bench scraper, you can use whatever metal bench scraper that you would like, and I heat it up with a torch, and then I slowly make one single pass with it. Now I love it when things look absolutely perfect and perfectly smooth, but if I know I'm going to be adding on details to a cake, then I won't really fret too much if there's a hole here and there, because it will get covered up in the end. And making cakes is also about saving time where possible. I placed all 3 tiers in the fridge so that could solidify up a little bit before we add on the detail. And now I'm working on this big fondant piece that I have at the very front of the cake. So everybody always asks me about my projector. I don't have a specific cake or cookie projector. I just went online on Amazon and chose a projector, and that's what I got. And honestly, the setup isn't super great for it. So that's why I don't really talk about it too often, but I will link it down in the description box below if you guys are curious about the particular one that I have. So I'm going to be using some edible paint in gray today, and the reason that I'm using gray is because it's dark enough where I can actually see the detail once that projection is gone, but it also will blend out and just kind of disappear once I put on the other paint colors. I should also mention that I'm painting this on a piece of fondant. I made sure to put a lot of cornstarch underneath because I really don't want this to get stuck at all. And it'll work a little better if the fondant is just a little bit stiffer, so that when I go in and I cut it with my X-Acto knife, that things aren't going to catch. Sometimes if the fondant is too pillowy soft, it will catch on that blade if it's not sharp enough, and then we won't get a clean cut. How much you choose to outline is up to you. I'm the type that just likes to go for the basic outlines because I know that once I start getting that color on there, a lot of that detail might get lost and I'll have to redraw it back in anyway. So it's up to you how much detail you want to do. And in general, I choose the pictures that are like coloring pages anytime that I'm doing a character of any sort, because it's just easier to get those really clean outlines from a coloring page, and you won't get bogged down with any unnecessary details. After that, I cut it all out and then I moved it to a flat plate. The cakes had been sitting in the fridge for about 30 minutes or so, so now they're ready to stack. So I'm taking a big dowel right down kind of off center because I will need to fit things on the front of this cake, so I am offsetting it just a little bit. And yeah, I was shaking those straws there because I forgot to put them in as supports. You want to make sure that underneath each layer that you always have supports, then a board, and then you put your piece of cake on there. Now this part does look a little risky here. I'm going to give you some tips to kind of help you along with this, but I don't like it when the fondant is super stiff. Otherwise, it's too straight and it doesn't wrap around the cake perfectly and just so the way I want it. So I still need it to be semi-malleable at this point. The other thing is I make my fondant just a slight bit thicker, not too thick that it's falling over from the weight, but just thick enough so that it can stand up slightly on its own while I can get those dowels in place. And all I'm doing is I'm placing some cake pop straws behind there and then reinforcing it with buttercream. And fondant isn't as delicate as you might think, so giving it a slight press will be totally fine, especially if you haven't let it dry for too long, because of course we don't want any cracking. Though if you do have a little crack or a little lump or bump here and there on this, you should be able to cover it up with paint or other details. Now, I held up a lot of different edible paints there. Basically, I was holding some edible paint, and then I had some airbrush colorant as well. You could use several things to color this. So the reason that I'm using those things is because that's what I have on hand. Ideally, I think I would use a mix of that and some petal dusts, but use whatever you have. Everything is going to work. And if all you have is gel food colorant, that will work too. You just have to dilute it down with a little bit of vodka. The face is probably the scariest part to start with, but the reason I start with it is because it's the scariest part, specifically for me. So I think it's a scary place because if you mess it up, then it really doesn't even look like the character at all, and then you have to start all over again. So what I'm doing here is I'm being really, really careful with the color I'm using. I'm actually taking some brown airbrush color and outlining it, and then I'm taking a dry brush to bring that color in. I don't want to go too dark here, and airbrush color has a lot of saturation. So if I were to just go in and directly color it, it would turn almost black. So that's why I'm using this dry brush method to quickly draw out that color. And this works well specifically with airbrush color because it is also loose. It's saturated, but it's loose, so it can be pulled out. Some edible paints can't do that, but I like the airbrush color for this reason. So all those parts that you outlined on her face, like her nose area, you want to outline that in brown and then just draw it out. And don't worry if things look a little bit patchy at this point. We will fill that in eventually. And you can always add more color onto the sides and draw it out even more. This part might make you a little bit nervous. It always makes me a little bit nervous when I'm doing detail work that I know I won't be able to go backwards on. So I ended up going in with the brown first, just because I felt it was a little less aggressive than the black. And then I went over it again with the black once I made sure that I got the eye area correct. In Disney characters and in most characters, it's all about getting that eye area right. I used to think it didn't matter what type of brushes that you use, but it's really important to use a good brush. The ones I'm using are from Sweet Sticks, and they were a little bit pricey, but now that I've used them for about a year, I want to say, they were definitely a good investment. They're really, really nice and thin, and what I like most is that the bristles don't come out. It also has a great comfort grip too, so it makes it really easy to use for long periods of time. Once I started getting this purple on here, it was just so satisfying and so beautiful. Now her dress has a lot of kind of different periwinkle colors on it, so I decided to mix in some blue. And I always find that adding in a little bit of white to whatever color you're highlighting with really makes things pop. And my trick is anytime something looks a little bit boring or flat or just doesn't look like it has a lot of life in it, I add the white details. And I love that she has kind of these white polka dots on her dress. They really help liven things up. She also, in some renditions, has flowers all over it too. You could also add those flowers in. And don't forget to add the white glint in the eye. This is really important. Sometimes the eye looks a little scary without it. Remember earlier when I talked about how that brown really was very saturated, and if I just went in on it, it can look a little bit black sometimes. So at first, for the hair, I started off like this, where I could kind of see some definition in that hair, and it looked okay. But when I looked at Isabella's hair from the movie, it is actually quite dark. So I decided to later on go in with just straight brown, and I also add in black as well. And it felt so nice and smooth to just gloss all of this hair over. Of course, you want to make sure that you go in with kind of a detail brush beside her dress and her other features so that you don't overdo it and end up with splotches all over her face and the other details of her dress. And I did end up going back and painting the sides of the fondant character. I ordered this mold a long time ago, and I was so impressed with the flower that it created. Now, the one thing is, whenever you have a really deep fondant mold, you want to make sure that you put some cornstarch on there. But for something like this mold, for example, which is a lot more shallow, you don't need cornstarch. It will pop out. But it's important that you really bang in that fondant and then pull it out so you get a really nice imprint on everything. There's a couple ways ways to attach the fondant to buttercream. I find with this faux Swiss meringue buttercream, it actually just adheres without any extra water or any extra buttercream. But if you're finding that things are falling off because maybe you used an American buttercream, adhere it with some edible glue, or you can also use buttercream or water. So you can steam your cake and then press it on. Just be careful when you're steaming that you don't over steam it. I added on some fake edible gold, which is basically just pieces of edible wafer paper that are dyed with a luster dust. And then I'm adding on some of this edible glitter as well. I think gold goes really well because Encanto just feels very gold to me for some reason. And if there weren't enough glittery elements on there, I decided to use that little pump just to give it a bit of a sheen. Now, this is the petal dust that I'm going to be using just to fill in those gaps. Remember when we said that things looked a little bit patchy, so just putting on some of that petal dust really helps warm things up and bring things together. This is the easiest rose ever. You can use gum paste, modeling chocolate, or fondant. I'm just using fondant because that's what I already had out. Roll the fondant out nice and thin, and then just get those petals thinned with a balling tool. And I will leave the cutter for that down in the description box below. And then just go ahead and roll up the rose and make sure that those petals go more upwards as you go. Make sure that the inside of the rose doesn't end up going out and jutting out like a mountain. Finishing up with some gold paint, which is just some luster dust mixed with vodka. And here is the finished cake, and you can store this in the fridge. It's going to be just fine. Let's get into the pricing of this cake. Times are different now. Things are way more expensive than when I first started this channel, and already people felt like prices were quite high. So this one might be a little bit shocking, but this would be $475 Canadian. Always make sure to account for your time, your cost of ingredients, but most importantly, it's your artistry that people are coming and looking for. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading weekly, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys. Bye!